Welcome to the Moms I Know with Sheila Denton and Maria Anderson-Farner. Two moms on a mission to reclaim childhood and take you from surviving to thriving on your parenting journey.
Hi, this is Sheila.
And this is Maria.
And we want to welcome you to
The Moms I Know. Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. John Dewey.
Today we are going to talk about education. It is how Maria and I met, and it is actually both what we have been, what our professions were. You know, I was a high school educator for 7 years, and Maria...
23 at Mountain Independent Study, and before that I was in early childhood education for several years.
Yeah, and so I was a high school educator for 7 years, but then I was a homeschool mom for 10 years, so that's still carrying the torch.
The torch, absolutely. You are your child's first teacher,
exactly.
And you continued on. We both did that with our children.
Yeah.
So education is such a huge topic, and it's such a personal choice for each family. And so we wanted to talk today about making that choice. And both of us have chosen to homeschool our children. We've also had to make other choices at different points in their lives as well. And so for me, I have this, feeling that, homeschooling is so valuable, especially in the early years. And I also know that many people can't make that choice. And so whether you choose to send your children to public school, whether you choose to send them to private school, or whether you choose to homeschool, that's a personal family decision. And also there's so many different types of schools out there, whether it's a homeschooling program or style or philosophy, or whether it's a private school or a public school. I mean, there's just, in the United States, charter schools. In the United States, we're so fortunate to have this range of educational choices. It also can be overwhelming. So I encourage families to really think about this deeply. I used to talk to families and they'd say, well, we want to save up for college, and that's such a huge decision. And I would laugh and say, kindergarten's the big choice. And sometimes it's even preschool. I mean, I hear stories of people that are thinking about preschool before their children are even born. And so, education is a very personal choice. It's a very important choice.
Yeah, and it's one that I know this is not going to be our only podcast on education for sure, because we have so much experience ourselves, but as well as being parents in our own journeys. There's not one size fits all, and that's really important to know. And you might start somewhere and you may think you've made the best choice, and you're in it and you're like, you know what, this doesn't feel so good. My child is coming home upset every single day. So then you go back and you do your research and you come up with another choice. And that's okay. Children are resilient, and so are you.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, because I know I've shared the story before, but our whole journey into homeschooling was dropping off a very happy first grade son on his first day, and then picking up a very unhappy child. And so I know we shared our stories early on in the podcast, but for me, sitting there crying with my son, he's unhappy, I'm unhappy, we're knowing that this is not working, and trying to struggle through that decision and agonizing over, am I making the right decision? Am I making the wrong decision? Talking to my husband, what are we going to do about this? And just all of those adventures that we have, all of those moments of, whether it's crisis or dilemma or whatever, help shape the decisions that we make. And so I think both of us have really gone through these with our own children and really had to make those decisions. And I think there was one point where family members of mine were going, wait a minute, you've homeschooled your kids and they've done public school and you've sent them to private school. There's sort of this just uncertainty of it all. But I knew in my heart that we were doing the right thing at the right time. And so throughout the stages of their childhood, we had to look at what is right for each individual child at each individual stage. And that did look very eclectic. And they both did independent study as well, in study abroad. Mm-hmm. And so it has shaped them in so many ways. And I know your three have also had different
experiences as well. Yeah, they all got the foundation of home education, independent study, and it was interesting because it wasn't a plan. Mm-hmm. we fell into that in this. And how I met Maria was just one of the situations where we actually were in the mainstream school And the day before school started, we had chose to go to an out of district school. It's a one school district. And they said, somebody from in district moved in, you're out. And we're like, okay, great. And then, serendipitously, we get a call from Maria, and she said, there's a spot in the independent studies. Would you like to choose it? And being that I was an educator, being that at that time, my niece was being homeschooled, there was some familiarity around it. We dove in, and we were just like, oh my goodness, we were so overjoyed, excited that we had somebody like Maria who became a mentor, and just the community of home educators really allowed for our children to be children and to experience I think authentic childhood, really being able to follow their lead. And when I look back at all of our homeschool adventures, we really were able to be child-led, and that was the beauty of it.
That's so important. And we also came to homeschooling not by choice.
Mm-hmm.
My son did a year in the public kindergarten, and then first grade did not work out. And so we started homeschooling, and yes, I was an educator as well. I was home with my children at that time, but I had my elementary credential. And so I thought, well, I can do this. And yet I've worked with so many families over so many years who did not have that background and still chose philosophically to homeschool their children and did a fabulous job at that. And so I just want to encourage anyone who might be listening that whether or not you have that background to just take that plunge. And there's so much support out there. And I really have seen, single moms, single dads, 2-parent working families, 2-parent, where there's a stay-at-home parent, it all can work. And so if you're even toying with the idea of homeschooling, we're such advocates for that, especially in the early years, because there's just the time, the space, the ability to create curriculum. And so we'll probably be talking a lot more about homeschooling specifically. But for those of you that are having to make choices, we're also, I believe in public education. I've been, raised in a family where public education is critical to, to a democracy. And so I believe that should be available for every child. And for those families that want to choose private education, that's a right and a privilege. And we have that in our country as well. And at some points, we've made that decision for our family as our children got older, and they went to the local Waldorf school, which was perfect for them at that time. So I really want to emphasize that, but I also want to say that there's nothing takes the place of those childhood years, and to encourage families, for whatever choice you make, to be able to spend as much time as possible as a family unit with your children, letting your children have that childhood, and being able to come to curriculum in a way that is natural, that is meaningful, that's unfolding for them in ways that are developmentally appropriate for them. And so many schools nowadays are really rushing the education. They're pushing so much, so hard, so fast. And of course, we've got these kids that by the time they get to middle school and high school are burnt out or disengaged. And so we really want to say a word about that as well.
Yeah, and I want to stress that you hit on it, but I just want to say it again, is that you do not need to be a teacher to be a homeschool parent. Mm-hmm. That's very important. It's a lot of people like, oh, you're a teacher, so that's why you did, or I could never do that. And what I have seen is really anybody can do it. Like you said, if you have a desire to be your child's first teacher, you need to go for it. And I think, in California, it's becoming an option because of SB 277, which is the mandatory vaccination laws. Those are forcing people to either move out of state or to say, I'm going to homeschool, set up my own homeschool, which is an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad we still have that option in this state to choose to homeschool. And I know that a lot of families really struggle with that decision. So I'm grateful that there's so many homeschool support groups as well. And our independent study program was part of the local elementary school district. And then it also became part of a charter school later on. But it's so key for whatever education system you choose, for it to be in alignment with your family's values, your goals, your aspirations, and then also the way your child learns. And so in our family, both of our children had a slightly different timetable than a typical public school timetable would have been. So for us, homeschooling was great, as well as then later on when they got older, the Waldorf school had a slightly different timetable, and also emphasis on subjects that were really important to us. So I want to encourage you to think about those things. And so there's just this whole concept of thematic learning is something that I felt was really important to families as over the years that would evolve. And so some people call it child-led learning. Some people call it thematic learning. There's families that do what is called unschooling, where it's really child-led, but I think that's sometimes misinterpreted to mean letting the child do whatever they want. And I can see that can actually backfire in many instances. So it's more looking at who your child is, what are their interests, what are their abilities, and then you work from those strengths. So one of the things that I love to do is really look at, who children are and what their strengths are. And then of course we're talking about their abilities and their strengths, but then we're bringing in things that they might be struggling with in a very gentle way through their strengths. And so for example, if a child is very musical, but math is something that is a little bit more challenging, you can bring in the math through their musicality. And so there's so many different ways of looking at education. And so it's really shifting that paradigm of separate subjects into what is meaningful and relevant for the child.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, that as you go on, if you want to be a successful, I don't know who am I to measure success here, but
we do the best we can.
Right, exactly. But to have a mentor, because I really feel like where we were at Mountain School, it was a hybrid program where the kids would go to school 2 days a week, and then the other 3 days we would homeschool. We would put them in classes, or we would do curriculum at home. And Maria was my children's classroom teacher. And so every month we met with Maria with my kids, and we went over what we were learning, what we were talking about. But I'd have to say that it, like what Maria just said of bringing in the weaknesses through the strengths and everything. And one thing that my older child had struggled with was reading. It did not come easy to him. And if he was in the classroom, he would have probably been labeled as, as I was saying, just
having a learning
difference. Exactly. I'm trying to be PC here. Having a learning difference, but he was not, and he was able to go through. But what we did to support him though, was we read to him every single night. Mm-hmm. And when I think about our homeschool journey, one of my biggest takeaways was the classic literature that we read to our children every night, and had the books that I never read as a child, but I'm reading to my kids. And through that, when Tegan finally, when the switch flipped, yeah, he was reading novels, mm-hmm, and reading nonfiction and reading books that were above his grade level at that time. And so it was, it was amazing that we were able to do that and to hold that. And it took a lot of strength, because it's not easy because you do compare yourself. Mm-hmm. And people are, oh, well, my best friend, her son was reading Harry Potter in second grade, in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so that was challenging to say, okay, well, my son is not reading at all.
But he's crafting a metal bowl by hand.
Exactly.
Right. I still remember that beautiful bowl that he made.
And so there's other strengths for sure.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because we were thinking that we could do a whole separate podcast on literature, which we still may do.
Oh,
but one
definitely.
One of the things that, since Sheila brought this up, that I want to stress right now is that the most important thing that you can do is read to your children from the time that they are little. And when we read with our children, then we're sharing vocabulary, we're sharing stories, we're sharing values, we're filling them full of these wonderful imaginative tales that have been passed down throughout millennia. And there's a reason for classic literature. They're classics because they've withstood the test of time. People from, over the generations have loved these stories. They're archetypal stories. So the fairy tales, the folk tales, the fables, the legends, the saint stories, the myths, the creation stories from different countries around the world. These are classic because they've come from our cultures. And so when we start reading to our children when they're very young, it teaches them patience, it teaches them vocabulary, and then there's the curriculum that can come. and we're sharing our values with them. So what we're choosing to read to them is as important as the fact that we are reading to them. So I'm working on a list to have on my website that I'll be posting of some of the favorites throughout, sort of the different ages and stages too. And there is some great current literature out there, but I have to say that literature that was written over 50 years ago and beyond, the vocabulary is so much more rich. And so, take, for example, Anne of Green Gables. Mm-hmm. The vocabulary in that is just fabulous, as well as such an incredible story that could be as relevant today as it was when it was written. And so we want to make sure that we're reading high quality literature with our children. And then the other thing is as we read it with them, they know that we know that they know that we know the story. And so, just in terms of these little teaching moments of morals or of struggles that people go through, then we have this shared story. And I think that can really help with character development.
For sure. And I feel like we need to do a whole podcast just on classic literature, mm-hmm. because for me, that was foundational with our homeschool journey.
Yeah.
I don't know, this kind of sounds a little bit, that none of my children had read Diary of a Wimpy Kid or no, right. You know what I mean? Like right. They weren't interested in that, know, at that time. However, my daughter, Juliet, is reading it now. Uh-huh. And I'm just like, okay, it's where she's at because she went into public school and it's what they're reading. And although we're still reading to her at home, the bigger, the classic literature, she has found her way, and she is reading at a higher level than her brother and sister were at her age. Uh-huh. So you trade-offs, right, exactly. Right, it's exactly trade-offs. And, she went into third grade below grade level just because that's, she was a little bit slower coming from homeschooling, but now she's above it. And so it's like, it took her a very short time to reach where she,
that grade level. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They catch up. They usually all find their way, and they all have different timetables. And that timetable is not always, in fact, not often, the typical public school or private school timetable. And so to be able to really honor children for who they are and how they learn, and with our children, we did, if they wanted to read something on their own, I wasn't going to be mm-hmm. censoring it unless it was really an inappropriate right. book. I do definitely believe in developmentally appropriate literature. So I did have to, kind of say, well, let's look at something else until mm-hmm. you're a little older for that. But also, if I was going to read it out loud, I wanted it to be something that I was enjoying reading out loud, and that my husband was enjoying reading out loud or hearing out loud. And that brings me back to one of my favorite stories of a summertime camping trip. We were reading a book together. It was, I can't even remember the name of it, but it was in the region that we were camping in the Southwest. And, my husband was doing camping things and I was reading, and what I noticed was from every evening he would be creeping closer and closer and closer till towards the middle of the book, all four of us were cuddled up listening to the story, and so it engages us at all ages. So of course we will be talking more about specific literature, but just the very act of making sure that it, as you think about education, whether your child is in public school, private school, or you homeschool, that family reading time just cannot be replaced. It's mm-hmm. such a valuable tool. And so I hope that we've inspired you to make sure that you're reading with your children and that you're reading something that is worthy of all of your time.
Right. And I know after reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid, a little bit of it, I've heard it on audio tape. It's actually quite hilarious. It's actually really funny.
Sometimes the value is in just a good laugh.
Right? I had judgment on it that I had nothing to know about, and I'm glad we dodged the Captain Underpants. I didn't read that one, but that's like one of the most popular books.
I guess so.
For children.
I have to admit, we missed that whole segment. But another thing is, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a high school teacher, and she's made an observation that she said that group of kids that came through that were the Harry Potter mm-hmm. readers, that she said that was the last group of kids that were real readers for pleasure.
Yeah.
And so nowadays we have so many kids that they're not wanting to read for pleasure. They're being entertained in other ways. And so I think that when we read to our children, we show them that we value it and we're sharing it with them. So hopefully that will be something that continues for many, many generations. I just am such a fan of good old fashioned
and
books.
the importance of fiction, to develop empathy, to develop, to learn about different cultures around the world and stuff. And it's like sometimes people are, going away from fiction.
Right.
And I think that's need to go back into it.
Yeah, in the public school system, nonfiction reading is becoming really important, which I understand that because so much of what an adult reads nowadays is nonfiction. But again, the values, the character development, all of those archetypal stories, that's all there in fiction, especially the good classic children's literature. I was just recently in Boston, and I was so excited. We got to Boston Commons, to the public garden, and there are the swan boats. And we read The Trumpet of the Swan.
Yeah.
So E.B. White, he wrote Charlotte's Web, and then Stuart Little, and then Trumpet of the Swan. And lo and behold, there is a pair of nesting swans. So the female is sitting on her nest, the male is sitting nearby. And it was just so exciting to be able to be in this place where for those of you who haven't read The Trumpet of the Swan yet, I encourage you to do so. But the swans nest in the park in the middle of Boston. And there they are to this day. And it was so fun to see.
And I just have to plug into my favorite book. I think really, because you said you traveled to the Grand Canyon, is Bridie of the Grand Canyon.
Oh.
If you were at the North Rim at the Grand Canyon, you can go rub his nose.
There's a statue of Bridie. I know. So these things that then become such important things. I know when we went there with our kids, of course they had to rub the nose of Bridie because they'd read the story, and so that's another thing. It's fun too when we're educating our children in homeschooling them. We can do these thematic things. And one year we were studying Lewis and Clark, and so we were able to go on part of the Lewis and Clark Trail along the Columbia River and up to the mouth in Oregon. And so we were reading, I always forget the official title, Streams to the Rivers, Rivers to the Sea, Journey to the Streams from the mountains, rivers to the sea, something like that. Anyhow,
Streams to the river, rivers to the sea.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's the story of Lewis and Clark, but told from the perspective of Sacagawea. And, when we got there, my daughter saw there was a statue of Sacagawea in Washington Park in Portland, and she was so excited. And so, making these stories come alive to the children through historical fiction. So, that's one of the joys of homeschooling, is that you can really create these thematic adventures around the stories. And I know you did Yellowstone and did a lot.
And we did the same thing, Lewis and Clark, same thing, Oregon, and then Yellowstone. And you just get onto Amazon and you type in where you're going and fiction, and you can find books that support that. At the basic level, you have Magic Treehouse, which at first I was not a fan of just because it's not great literature. However, some of the stuff the kids were able to get some of it. You know what I mean? Some
good history.
Yeah, good history. Exactly.
And it makes them excited about learning.
Yeah. So if you can get, I'd say that's entry level, but then you can get some really, really rich stories. Look for the Newbery winners and look for, even studying, Island of the Blue Dolphins, right? We did that, and then went down to Santa Barbara and went to the cathedral, went to the Mission Santa Barbara, and were able to see the actual great, placeholder for the grave marker for the woman who was found for Island of the Blue Dolphins.
Amazing story.
So there's so much, living history through literature.
That takes me back to my own childhood. We did not travel as much as a family. I do remember the trips that we took, and they're just etched in my memory because they were so profound. But we didn't travel as much, and I was not homeschooled, but boy, was I a reader. And so those stories taught me so much, and I traveled in my mind. And so, even if we can't go on those incredible adventures, we can go there through the books. And so there are wonderful quotes. And we should have started with that quote of, oh gosh, I'm not going to remember it now, but about, a good book can take us so far away. So we'll find that one and add that in there. So anyhow, it's just education with our children is such an incredible journey. And also, as we go through this with them, we learn so much. And I feel that by homeschooling our children, we learned curriculum, we learned patience, we learned so much about each other. So again, whatever decision you make about that education, you are the ones that make the difference for your children. They have found studies that say it is the philosophy and the values of the family that really dictate the success of a child. So if you value education, however you choose to educate your children, that is going to be passed down to them.
I wholeheartedly agree, because I've had people ask me, how do you know private school or public school or homeschool? And I said, as long as you have parents that are supportive of you and you have a supportive family culture, you will be just fine no matter what school you choose.
Yeah. Yes, it really comes down to that family unit. So with that, good luck in your decisions.
Yes.
And we're always available for questions.
Yep.
So take care, and we'll see you on the next episode
of The Moms I Know.
Thanks for joining us today for The Moms I Know. To learn more about Sheila and her online program, The Mom Map, visit purplebeetnutrition.com. For Maria's monthly blog and to learn more about her group programs and retreats, visit soquelessentials.com. That's SOQUEL essentials.com. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Moms I Know. Until next week, have a joyful family journey.